So here's the audio out cable on the far left. You see where it says to sound only, so it'll still go to the motherboard, but it's just a different connector. It's a little 4-pin mini connector. You have some configuration jumpers to set it for master or slave. So there's 2 EIDE slots if you're using that, which is what you're seeing here. That big fat double prong connector is an EIDE interface. So you'd plug that in, and then there's going to be 2 more connectors on the thing. You can have another drive in there. So whichever one's first on that first cable. So from the motherboard out, you're going to hit one cable, and then you go out more, you're going to hit the second connector. So that's this. So from the motherboard, you come out, you hit the first connector. That's going to be the primary device, and then the second one's going to be the secondary device. So wherever you have this plugged in, it can be plugged into the primary, it can be plugged into the secondary. You had to configure it properly, and then of course you had to put the Molex power in. But like I said, even the last 5 years, it's 2016 now, even the last 5 years, you would have used a SATA connector. Controller cards. Select the controller card before buying the CD-ROM. If you had to do that, yes, because they have to match. If it's SATA, you need SATA. Use secondary IDE controller on the motherboard. That's true, because we had a primary and a secondary. And then on each ribbon, you have a primary and secondary drive, master-slave configurations. And ensure a proper connection, sure. So if you're playing music on it, the old CD music, and you're not getting any sound, it's because you forgot to hook up the audio cable. Installing an internal drive. Mount an internal drive in a computer with an open bay for a 5¼ inch disk drive. So that's the big one. The 3.5 is a little tiny one like the laptop drive. Have the necessary tools and parts on hand. Most of them today are thumb screws, so you don't even need a screwdriver. If they're on really tight, you might need a screwdriver to loosen it once. And then just put them back hand tight, unless it's the non-thumb. Then you're going to need a Phillips head screwdriver. Connect the document or check the documentation to connect the DVD drive only or correctly. For SCSI drivers, set the correct SCSI ID and then properly terminate the chain. So you have first device, second device, third device, usually out to about 7. And then you had to terminate it. So it knows there's no more jumpers it has to check or no more devices it has to go out and check. So software setup, most of them were plug and play from about 98 on. So for Microsoft Windows 3X, here's the driver. For 95, 98, and ME, here's the driver that you can use. The early models, you had to have a specific driver, but then they went generic with everything because they became an industry standard. For NT in 2000, they have plug and play support and anything beyond that as well. Even Linux, the same kernels, or the relative kernels to those models. Multimedia presents graphics data, sound, and video in an integrated way. So that's true. They do it all together. It decodes everything on the disk and just sends out the audio and the data in the case of video. The Microsoft Multimedia PC Marketing Council, now the Multimedia PC Working Group, generates standards for multimedia computers. So this sounds like a test question, not something you need to remember for real life. The current standard is MPC Level 3. MPC sets several minimum requirements. Okay, if you're going to get into penetration testing, you want to remember the acronym MPC. It's one of the things that you will attack, one of the technologies that you will learn how to attack. Hopefully you get that far. And then video capture software provides the interface for importing, exporting, and editing video formats. So they came with video capturing software, but it wasn't very good. Limitations of early hard disk drives. The ST506 interface developed by Seagate Technology is now obsolete. Of course it is. That's very old. The IDE ATA, which we know we use SATA today, standard ATA, is limited to 528 megabytes and supports hard disk drives only. So there was a time when you bought a big drive and your computer couldn't support it. It didn't know how to address it. So you had to reflash your BIOS to get it to support the bigger drives and or replace the motherboard. This is when people started going to those daughter boards. They would just add a daughter board instead of replacing the motherboard. Daughter boards were 40, 50 bucks. The motherboards were on the order of hundreds to 200s. EID improvements support up to 4 hard drives, 2 on each controller. That's what I was telling you about. There's a primary, secondary, and then a primary, secondary drive on each controller. Provide faster data transfer rates. They get better and better. Support CD-ROM, tape, and zip drives. We know that those are now obsolete as well. We only use SATA. It supports better airflow inside the chassis as well, which is very important. The 528 megabyte limit, cylinders, heads, sectors, tracks, maximum capacity. So we had a BIOS limit and then an IDE ATA limit. So the maximum usable limits are 1024 for cylinders, heads 16, and sectors per track 63. So we had to use the maximum usable limit, right? Wherever the first bottleneck we hit is going to be the limiting factor, and that's what you're seeing here. The smallest numbers prevail, right? So they had 4 major upgrades. They had the LBA, the PIO, and industry standard command sets. That's still around today. The command sets, they change a little bit, but not much. The use of that's the actual commands that you're sending to and from the drive to get it to do things, which is still relevant today. We'll talk about that when we get into SATA drives and how to erase them properly. The use of IRQ15 and IO address 178. So that freed up one of our IRQs for us to use in other things. We've talked about that previously. Interrupt requests. Overcoming the 528 megabyte barrier. Before LBA, capacity equals cylinders times heads times sector per track. And after LBA, it's cylinders equals capacity divided by heads times sector per track. So that's when we started getting the multi-platters and the flip-flop sides.